I'm Melanie Nagy in British Columbia on the hunt for Canadian companies that are the worst at answering or solving consumer complaints to the Better Business Bureau. Airlines have some of the lowest BBB ratings in the country, everything from a D- to an F, which comes as no surprise to frustrated passengers.
When we were on the way to the airport, we got a notification saying it would be delayed.
The flight was delayed 6 hours. Also, my luggage is still in Toronto.
Airlines are under no obligation to answer BBB complaints. The Canadian Transportation Agency has a process, but you better have a lot of patience. They had a massive backlog of over 60,000 claims and a 1.5 year wait for a complaint to be investigated. One exception is WestJet, which gets hundreds of complaints, but because they tried to solve them, they got a B-. Still, delays and poor service are just par for the course, say passengers stuck waiting for flights.
So I was delayed like 4 times. So I was supposed to leave at 8:30 last night, and then I got bumped to midnight, then to 6 a.m. this morning, and then to now 1:30.
And in this email here, it'll show you that the reason for the delay was due to crew availability.
Rob and Adrienne McNabb know all too well the frustrations of flying. They live in Royston, BC, about 3 hours north of Victoria, but say delays and cancellations by airlines sometimes leave them stranded. Their trip to Florida back in 2020 was the last straw. On their way back home, they heard that all too familiar announcement from Air Canada, a company with over 500 unresolved BBB complaints in the last 3 years. Their flight was delayed.
And what he said in addition was that because it was weather-related, having to de-ice the plane, there would be no accommodations for passengers arriving in Vancouver making connections. So that meant that, if we missed our connection, which we ultimately did, we'd have to rent a hotel and added expenses.
How are you feeling? What's running through your mind?
I'm angry. This isn't the first time this has happened with this airline or any other airline for that matter.
Rob says the situation got even more ridiculous when the gate agent told him where the plane was being de-iced.
The plane had to be de-iced in Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo, are we talking Sao Paulo, Brazil? I go onto the internet and go on the weather app and pull up Sao Paulo, and I find this, that the temperature at that day was 20 Celsius.
Wow.
So de-icing doesn't wash.
When Rob and his family finally arrived back home, he complained to Air Canada. Did you have to email this to them?
I did.
Did you ever hear anything back from this?
Denied.
Air Canada said the delay was outside of their control, so no compensation. But they also changed their story. The delay wasn't weather-related, now it was caused by scheduling issues. In a statement to W5, Air Canada said that's not unusual because when they do an investigation, the reason for a delay's true cause may take longer to determine.
We are joined by air passenger rights advocate Gabor Lukács,
founder of Air Passenger Rights. What are your rights when you do feel that you've experienced discrimination?
Air passenger rights advocate Gabor Lukács has been a thorn in the side of the Canadian airline industry for over a decade.
What troubles me the most is that airlines are forcing passengers to get on the plane or else they lose their money.
Not only is he an outspoken critic of airlines, but he runs an air passenger rights website and a Facebook group with almost 150,000 members. And he tries to help passengers like Rob by complaining to the Canadian Transportation Agency whenever he sees an airline policy that he says violates government regulations.
In 2008, I began to embark on this complaint by complaint, airline by airline approach to deal with what airlines have been doing, how the airlines have been just breaking the law systematically and refusing to obey what has already been set out in the law. Nothing special, just do whatever is in the law.
Gabor says many of his complaints were successful in changing airline policies.
Today marks a milestone for air travel in Canada.
But more help was on the way for passengers like Rob. In 2019, the head of the Canadian Transportation Agency, Scott Streiner, along with the Minister of Transportation, Mark Garneau,
we've been working on this for a very, very long time,
announced the Federal Air Passenger Protection Regulations, or APPR. With this in place, Rob had somewhere to go with his denied claim from Air Canada. In fact, according to the APPR, each member of his family could be entitled to $1,000 if the arrival of the passenger's flight is delayed by 9 hours or more.
They are only protecting passengers in name.
But Gabor says the Canadian Transportation Agency's enforcement of the APPR has been an abysmal failure.
They are written in such a way that it is incredibly difficult to enforce passenger rights.
Incredibly difficult to enforce because in order for Rob to get compensation, he has to prove his flight wasn't delayed by weather or scheduling issues. He only qualifies for reimbursement for reasons within the carrier's control. But Gabor claims that airlines exploit that policy.
The most blatant example is crew shortage, the airline's own employees shortage. They claim it's outside their control. The airline sold the ticket, they knew how many employees they will have. All this is predictable, but then they have the arrogance to tell passengers that a flight cancellation due to crew shortage is actually something outside the airline's control.
Gabor would like to see a system similar to Europe's, where he says the rules are so strict and fines for breaking them so high, airlines go to great lengths to avoid delaying passengers.
The airline has to have backup pilots, backup crew members, backup planes, everything. They have to have reasonable backups. You do have some maintenance issue with aircraft. You have to have backups. So what those air passenger protection regulations should do and do in Europe is they put a dollar value on passengers' time.
But in Canada, even travelers' complaints about airlines often don't get solved very quickly. Remember that backlog at the Canadian Transportation Agency? Over 60,000 claims and a year-and-a-half wait?
There's supposed to be a process that people are able to follow now. Why didn't you choose that option?
It could be years before you get your case heard. Typically, they find more in favor of the airline. So I felt that a more fair opportunity to get justice is through the courts. Yes, so where it says evidence number whatever, I would have a corresponding document to substantiate.
Rob filed a claim with BC's Civil Resolution Tribunal, hoping they'd have better luck enforcing the federal passenger protection rules. At first, Air Canada tried to settle, offering travel vouchers for Rob and his wife, but nothing for their son, who was also on the trip.
And at this point, I said, no. We're in this together. He was affected much more than we were because this holiday was for him. And so I said, no, I'll take this to tribunal. And that's where we went.
In the end, the tribunal found that the plane didn't need de-icing in Sao Paulo, but was delayed in Montreal due to de-icing. However, the delay for scheduling issues was within Air Canada's control.
Here we go. This is the one.
I order Air Canada to pay Robert McNabb, Adrian McNabb, Jonathan McNabb. Then it breaks down the total there, a total of $3,159.
It was very gratifying, and I felt good that the little guy can stand up to the big corporation.
And the next time Rob got delayed by another airline, he went back to the tribunal and successfully settled 2 cases with WestJet, but he had to sign a non-disclosure agreement, so he can't talk about them.
Absolutely no. Do not ever sign a settlement agreement or a release that contains a gag order.
Gabor worries that gag orders could stop people from finding out that sometimes airlines have to compensate passengers.
Settlements are a good thing. The law says they have to pay anyway. So they cannot say we are going to pay you only if you give us a release. You can say no, you have to pay me anyway.
Yeah, Rob, this is the letter that WestJet sent us.
But Rob can talk about his Air Canada case, and word has gotten around. Now friends and family come to him for advice when they've had delayed or canceled flights, and he helps them take their claims to the tribunal.
And if they fail to respond, which is good for you, then it becomes a default judgment.
And were you successful with those?
Yes, they were successful in all 4 cases.
That success gives Rob a sense of vindication, but Air Canada still has among the highest number of unresolved BBB complaints in the country. W5 requested an interview with the airline. They declined, but in a statement said, Air Canada wholly reject the suggestions of some critics that we avoid compensating customers, adding the transportation agency conducts frequent spot checks of our APPR handling and has made no findings that we avoid our obligations. But when W5 looked at the latest annual report from the transportation agency, we found a different story. Air Canada was ordered to pay $77,000 to 117 passengers previously denied compensation, on top of $13,400 in penalties for 67 instances of non-compliance with the air passenger rules. In terms of court cases, Air Canada says since 2020 they received 11 judgments requiring us to pay additional compensation to passengers. That is less than 3 per year, whereas we transported more than 40 million passengers last year.
Minister, do you find flying pleasurable these days?
Flying pleasurable? I never find flying pleasurable. I'm afraid of flying.
The Honorable Pablo Rodriguez is the current Minister of Transportation. He's responsible for making sure federal officials at the Canadian Transportation Agency, or CTA, enforce the passenger rights rules.
Minister, W5 spoke with passengers who feel that there are so many loopholes in the APPR that the only way they can get compensation is to take airlines to court. Why do you think passengers have so little faith in the APPR?
Well, we're fixing that, actually. As you know, Melanie, we invested $75 million extra to make sure that the CTA could add 200 employees to accelerate the claims. And we also made sure that there was like one-stop shop. Before, people would have to go to one place and that person was sent elsewhere, etc. It's going to be one person for one claim. So it should accelerate stuff.
Minister Rodriguez hopes accelerating the process will help clear up that 60,000 complaint backlog and year-and-a-half wait.
I feel the frustration, and we're working hard to improve things.
What timelines are we looking at? I mean, 40 million passengers flew with Air Canada last year. Millions are going to go through, the next year. Like, when are things going to get better?
The first thing I did, I've been a minister for a few months now, is meet with all the big airline companies because there's a clear problem there. I've also tabled a bill in the House, which is C-52, which sets service standards. The companies will know what is expected from them.
Minister Rodriguez believes his new Air Transportation Accountability Act will improve service in Canada. But Rob McNabb says it's the airlines that need to do better.
If you had a message for Air Canada here today, if you had a representative or some head of Air Canada standing before you, what would you say to Air Canada?
Shame, shame, shame. We've entered into contracts in good faith, and you have let us down.